Welcome to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. Thank you all for listening. Matthew is still on a bit of a break for the next few weeks. My name is Alice. I'm one of the SLEERICKETS co-hosts. I also have my own podcast. It's called Poetry Says. I've gone with the tagline, Australian poetry up late. Sometimes I get there. This is a conversation very much in two parts. It's between Brian and I, Brian being another of the SLEERICKETS co-hosts, and really one of my favourite people on earth to talk to. I feel like my life would be immeasurably improved if I could have lunch with Brian once a month. It's got to be once a month, Brian. I know you're busy, but you're just going to have to make it work. So in the first part of this conversation, Brian and I talk about the 2023 movie Anatomy of a Fall, which won the Palme d'Or. And I suspect for most listeners, this is a movie that is on the I've really been meaning to see that list. It is really worth your time. If you like a bit of mystery, if you like a bit of courtroom drama, and particularly if you are a writer who is also trying to maintain a relationship, this is a movie for you. It's kind of like What If The Fugitive, but a lot less running and a lot more white wine and pantry meals. So we do spoil some of the major plot points, but I've thought about it and I reckon this movie is kind of unspoilable. In fact, you might even enjoy it a bit more if you listen to this first. So no need to run off and see the movie, but also you should see this movie. So once we've talked about Anatomy of a Fall, we move on to one of the themes, I think, or maybe one of the meta themes of this podcast. Can writers be happy? And this leads us into a much sillier and much more revealing discussion that we have in the secret show half of this episode, which I'll tell you more about at the end. For now, I hope you're not missing Matthew too much, and I hope you enjoy this conversation between Brian and I. I certainly did. Yeah, I was trying to figure out when was the last time we spoke, and I think it was like May or something. Like way too long ago.
Is that true? Have we not done a three-way? No?
I don't think so, because I think the last time we spoke was when I was trying to interview you and Matthew about parenting.
Right. And you feel like you wanted a redo with
I
that?
really want a
At least for the
redo.
secret show?
I
Okay,
want
well,
a
I'm ready.
redo.
I'm ready.
Okay.
And I feel like both of the topics today have to do with parenting to some extent. I rewatched Anatomy of a Fall. You did as well?
I did yesterday. I wasn't looking forward to rewatching it, but then when I did,
Nor was I. Yeah, it felt like you'd given me homework and I was sort of dreading it. And then
I felt like I
once I
gave
turned it on,
myself homework.
yeah, once I turned it on again, I'm happy I did. The first time I watched it, it was on a flight,
Oh,
and like I had like my not airplane sick, nauseated son like half vomiting on me the whole time. So it was a negative experience. It was nice to watch it on a real screen and to form opinions. I'm hoping you can help me conclude because it's like I have analysis. I just don't have conclusions based on that analysis, and I'm not even sure if I like the movie very much, but I definitely think there's something to it. So yeah, wanted to dive deep there. We have this awful, you always have an awful Slate article
always.
to try to cap the show off with. Anything else on your mind though before we get into the meat and potatoes?
Not really. I'm just, what are we now? We're nearly halfway through December. It always feels like a gauntlet. I don't know how it is
Yeah.
for you, but yeah, it's like it's my birthday in 2 days.
Happy birthday. I had no idea.
Thank
That's
you.
exciting.
And and then yeah, sort of Canberra for Christmas, and then Tassie for New Year's. So it's just like a lot of family, a lot of celebrating, a lot of busyness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
What's it like for you?
end of semester insanity
Mm.
with my own teaching, and then each one of the kids, Owen has taken up the clarinet this year as his instrument of choice. So we've been practicing for that. We're getting ready for the concert, and to make it more ridiculous, because like it's terrible for everyone. They don't want to do like multiple concerts. So Owen's in fifth grade. He's 11, but we have the fifth, sixth, and seventh grade like band members all together. So it's like one 4 hour hellscape nightmare of like squeaking. Like they can't do their mouths right, like they can't make the sound. So it's like them followed by the flautists, and then like the percussion kids and the celloists, and like none of they've only been doing this for September, October, November. We they've only any of them have played instruments for 3.5 months. So we got our concert ready. It's gonna be good.
Wow, that's
Mm.
insane. Yeah, I played the flute, but I remember the clarinet players really for like the first year, they were just squeaking.
Oh, they can't make the noises. Yeah, and he's coming
No.
home all proud, and he's like, "Dad, listen, I'm doing the," and then it's like,
Yeah, it's like it's a really
"Do you know
intense
what song
process.
I'm playing?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's great." He's like, I'm like, "What?" He's like, "What song do you think it is?" And like Frere Jotka, and he's like, "No, Dad, really," and it's like a lot of that. So we got that kid doing that. We got the other kid singing songs and they're both trying out for baseball teams. And I got my grading and editing, and we're flying to France as a family with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law and her husband and their kids. And we're all gonna do Christmas out there. So a lot of prep and a lot of trying not to get COVID, and so it goes. But yeah, December's a busy month.
Beautiful. Christmas in France will be nice. Whereabouts?
In Paris. And
What?
we're,
Christmas in
yeah,
Paris?
Christmas in Paris with
Gracious
my
me.
wife's extended family. Yeah,
Wow.
it's gonna be taxing, but beautiful. But beautiful.
Taxing but beautiful, like every holiday. Okay, well, it's probably good then that you had a little French movie here to kind of get you
Exactly.
to the French
Exactly.
headspace.
So we like this film. Why did you ask me? Why did you propose it?
I think it is a fascinating movie about compromise in relationships.
You think it's a movie about compromise in relationships?
Yeah, I mean, also it's a movie about like, did this woman kill her husband? But that's the least interesting part of it to me.
Well, actually, I'm even skeptical about that. So are we spoiling the film? Do we assume people have watched it before we discuss it?
Let's try not to spoil it too much because it's really, really worth watching. I mean, it won the Palme d'Or last year.
Yeah,
I think it's phenomenal. And yeah, let's just see what we can do in terms of keeping some of the plot points out if we can.
sounds great.
Yeah.
So you think it's a film about whether or not a woman killed her husband, and you think it's a film about compromise for the sake of family.
Yeah, I think those are, yeah. What do you think it's about?
I'm not sure. And I think that I thought it was about whether or not a woman killed her husband on my first watch.
Hmm.
But on my second watch, I think the film makes it clear in one way or the other, if we don't want to say which way. But I don't think that is ever really in doubt. I don't think we get any evidence, any compelling evidence at all on one side of the argument.
Really?
So yeah, really, which is going to make the not spoiling it part hard. But in watching it again, I was looking for any evidence that would indicate that the wrong thing was the right thing, and I couldn't.
Okay, we're going to have to spoil it to talk about it properly, aren't we? So
I
sorry.
think we are. I
Pause
think we
this
are
and
going to
go
need to
watch
spoil it.
Anatomy of a
So
Fall.
pause it. Okay, 2.5 hours later, we're back.
We're back. Great
We're
movie,
back.
hey?
Here we are. So she didn't kill her husband, and right? Do we have any reason to think she did?
On the second
Do we have
watch, I
any?
was like, oh, she killed him.
But what evidence is there? I feel like the movie didn't. I thought part of the I don't know, part of what I liked it about it was that there's no reason to think she did. There's not, and I thought that the more like comedically awful that the lawyer for the prosecution was in the second watch made it seem even more unlikely that that case in the real world would even have gone to trial.
Mm.
Like there's no forensic evidence at all. There's a splatter expert who is immediately contradicted by another splatter expert. There's his psychologist who's obviously meant to be mocked as like not someone to be taken seriously. There's her novel writing, which again, any sophisticated viewer such as ourselves, for us, it's clear that you can't read her novels as evidence. So in watching it the first time, I thought, I wonder if she did it. In watching it the second, it struck me that there's not a single piece of evidence, circumstantial or otherwise, that suggests that she committed the crime. And that
Mm.
to me changed the perspective, made it in some ways a more interesting movie, I think. But I'll take a step back and try to hear your perspective if you do think that it's intentionally ambiguous. But after it was like I was half an hour in and I'm like, I'm gonna try to watch for this because I can't so far there's been zero evidence and I'm wondering whether there's gonna be a single piece of evidence. And I don't think there was.
I was watching it that way as well. I'm going to try to give a little setup of what the
Please.
movie is about and what it does for people. So, Anatomy of a Fall, it came out last year, 2023. It's directed by Justine Triet. I've never seen any of her other movies. Stars Sandra Huller. Incredible performance
Yeah,
from
she's
her.
spectacular. Yeah, she's worth the 2.5 hours just to watch her face react to things. She's really, really wonderful.
I was thinking too, like, she's one of those women who at 45 is just the most beautiful she's
Yeah,
ever
she's
been.
beautiful.
She's
Yeah.
gorgeous, so compelling to watch. So she is a very successful novelist. Her husband is a lecturer and also has been struggling with his own novel for many years. And they have a son. They live in this chalet way, way high up in the mountains near Grenoble in the south of France. And one
Which is
day,
funny because she keeps on calling it a shithole,
I
and it's the
know.
most beautiful house I've ever seen, right? It's like it is there are a lot of moments in the movie where like it's a fun experience to have her. Anyway, she's German, which is important,
That's
and he is
important.
French, and
Yes.
they have moved back to his like goat rearing town after the accident of his son. So take it from there.
Yeah. So it becomes important at a certain point in the film. We realize that, and I guess we need to sort of talk about this, but the dad is maybe partially responsible or at least caused a chain of events that led to his son have being hit by a motorcycle and
Which I
his
want to
eye.
come back to.
Yeah, and his eyesight is quite severely damaged. So that comes out maybe a third of the way through. What this movie does so beautifully is it introduces something that seems like definitive to me anyway. This is how I felt it functioning. It introduces a
Hmm.
piece of evidence that seems definitive. She had this reason to hate him, for example, like you hurt our boy. And then some new perspective comes in from some other direction, which completely cancels it out. So every time you make a decision about whether she did or didn't do it, you get within the next sort of 5 to 10 minutes something to make you doubt your conclusion. And I finished the film this time. I think both times I've finished it and thought she got away with it. And a lot of that is
Really?
to do with the last shot.
Of her
Beautiful.
on the couch with the dog falling asleep?
Yes, it's this wonderful shot. And I realized watching it the second time, that is the only time we see her alone. In every other moment in the film, she's with somebody else. So she has a reason to put on a front, basically. But when we
Right.
get this moment, it's just the audience and her. And what's so brilliant about it is that we don't get any new information. It's not as if her face falls, she starts crying through relief. It's not as if she has a little smug smile. She stays completely kind of blank. And I don't know, I don't know why. I don't have any Oh, but because of this, we know that she did it. It's just a sense that I have. So I don't think I could back up my conclusion here, but I also just don't feel like that's the most interesting
I
question that
agree
you're
with
playing
you.
with.
I agree
Yeah.
with you. Part of, I mean, I want to talk about the son's blindness. I guess he has a very, very little bit of sight is
Yeah.
what's suggested by when he looks at the medicine bottle for reasons we don't need to get into here. He like holds it very close to his face. So
Yep.
he can see a little bit, but for the most part, he's blind. Um, so what happened was the father has, based on the father's own preferences, taken over most of the child rearing, and the mother prefers to write and to be a morning and nighttime parent in the way
Hmm.
that many parents are. So the child was officially under the responsible eye of the father, but the father was having a good writing session. So the father called the babysitter to pick the child up from school. The babysitter came late, which is a weird ambiguity because I don't really see how that affects what happens next, because the babysitter still picks the kid up from school and they're walking together and the kid gets hit by a car, right? And his optic nerve gets damaged.
Yes.
So that's not the father's fault.
No, it's not, but it's one of those nightmare scenarios that I feel like this is the kind of like horrendous fantasy that I torture myself with, where it's like, what if because I didn't leave the house at this time, that caused a chain of events whereby, XYZ, and now somebody's dead.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I mean, since the birth of my first kid, I thought, I think a lot of parents do, obsessedly about the kid dying, about both kids dying because
Mm,
they're so fragile and they seem so susceptible to death. With the first kid, again, I don't think uncommon, but anytime I would wake up in the middle of the night, I would like go to make sure he was still breathing. And I had all sorts of fantasies, not in the positive sense of his death,
mm.
especially the first one. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I've ever said this out loud. I, I actually, maybe if I did say it out loud, it was to Matthew like 2 years ago. But I remember thinking, if he does die, I want him to be with my wife, like at that
Yes,
time.
I
Like I
remember you
would,
saying this. Yeah.
yeah, I think I did say it to Matthew. I, and that got me into the mindset of the movie a little bit, the sense that like this disaster has struck the family, but the movie not only at this point, but in so many points, distances the consequence from the initial step by so many layers. It's like not was the father wasn't driving drunk and the kid was blinded, right? The father wasn't even with the kid. The father hired a babysitter to take care of the kid. The father's not responsible for that at all. And that's a choice that the film made. Like the film relies on the son as a moral arbiter in some way. I think it's the son is the closest thing that the audience has to a proxy within the film. Do you
Mm.
agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. He's our proxy.
And then he weighs in towards the end with a story, and we don't know whether the story is true or not, but he weighs in to save the the mother's life, right? He comes and tells a story which indicates suicide is more likely than homicide.
Mm.
And I think we're left to wonder whether that is an honest story or whether the kid's outsmarting the system or not, which is an interesting choice. But if you're gonna write that, I was thinking like, why does the kid have to be blind? And the answer is the kid has to be blind so the father can feel guilt and the mom can blame the father. But then I don't think most writers would write it like that. I think most writers would write the kid being the surviving kid and their other child died.
Yeah, I think that's
And
true. Yeah.
right, that seems to be the more typical way that this is that the house is fractured, because the other sibling died, and then the sibling who continues to live with them is trying to negotiate this scenario while dealing with his own emotions. This is either more interesting or like a sort of shitty metaphor about how nobody can really see anything.
God, I hope it's not
Like it's
that.
it's interesting to make the kid blind. It also allows her to give that speech about how she never wanted to see the kid as a victim, and we only get one life, and this was his life. And the father felt sorry for the kid and therefore felt sorry for himself for having a broken kid, and she never wanted to allow that. And I found that to be really compelling and really interesting. But on second watch again, I was just overwhelmed by how many things were happening in the movie. And I like the kid is blind, the kid has the dog is involved in the crime, the kid is involved with the crime. Her lawyer isn't just a lawyer, her lawyer is this like ambiguous figure who had a crush on her and is like the only person she knows in France, I guess. Or the only lawyer she does, and nothing ever gets consummated with that. They're like all of these subplots. Remember, her best friend shows up and wants him to see a psychic,
Oh
right? And
yeah.
then nothing
Yeah.
ever comes of that. It feels like every time something could just be there for the purpose of plot, it's complicated to a certain element. The Trier, is that how you pronounce her name?
I think
Um,
so. That's what I'm guessing.
she like makes every character a three-dimensional character with his or her own backstory. I think for better and worse. Like even the guy who listens to the audio recording of their fight is this like dopey constable man, but he's clearly like suffering and really wants her to be guilty, and there seems to be some misogyny in there or something, but she's like nobody is just a flat character there to move the plot forward. Everybody has this sort of like in a different movie she falls in love with her lawyer, right? And
Mm.
it seems like that's where it's going, and they are very tender with each other, and he clearly loves her and she sort of reciprocates, and we don't know whether he thinks that she's guilty or not, and it doesn't, but we never find out any of this. So it's a there's something both thrilling and frustrating in my mind about this sort of plot, which I haven't seen a lot of examples of, I don't think, where they're not really red herrings because you stop assuming they're going to come back and matter, but there's just a deluge of just information and new information and interpretation and trying to figure out what's going on versus what's really going on. And I think that's one of the reasons why it felt exhausting to me to return to it, because I'm like, oh, like, do I need to? Like, all of the scenes in my memory were way longer than they actually were. Like, I thought I was going to need to sit through her best friend trying to get the kid to see a psychic, but really, that's like 20 seconds of the movie. Like,
Yeah.
I remembered, I'm like, oh, we still haven't gotten to the dog vomiting scene. Like, can I go to the bathroom during that scene?
I
But that
felt
was
the
really like
same way.
it's like a 35-second scene. You know what I mean? So it's there's so much weight in every element in every aspect of the movie that it's a 2.5 hour movie that remembers as though it's like 4.5 hours, but in fact is kind of a delight. And that's where it's definitely worthwhile watching, but I'm not quite sure where I come down on how it all comes together.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about I hadn't framed it in my mind as a deluge of information, but the movie is constantly reminding you like pay attention, here's a new detail. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? The other thing that she keeps doing with the camera, which I noticed on the rewatch and loved, is that she never allows you to feel stable. She's always shooting things at an edge. She shoots like the path of a car on the precipice of a mountain. She
Right.
shoots the son playing piano, but from underneath his hands. So she has this constant sense of height that she's playing with, and she's always reminding you that there's a possibility that things could go wrong. Like in the first 2 minutes of the film, she mentions one of the characters mentions the son's accident. And then we cut to a shot of his hand on the hot water tap of the shower.
Yeah.
And I was just like, ah, I love movies. I love movies
No,
so much.
and as you say, everything seems you're on the precipice, but it's sort of literal precipice. Like the
It's,
movie
yeah,
is the anatomy of a fall, and it seems like at any moment, like a car might fall off a cliff, or a kid might fall. Like even when the blind boy goes up to the window where his father died, and he's a
mm,
blind boy opening up a window on the top floor of a. It does seem like you are on the verge of disaster at every moment, a disaster that never arrives,
I think
which
that's why it's
is
so exhausting to watch the
yeah.
first time because I was just terrified the entire time as to what was
That's a
going to
great
happen.
point. Right. There's almost, it's more relaxing. Maybe you should listen to this podcast before you see the movie because I found the second, sorry if you went and spent 2.5 hours watching it and now have returned for me to tell you that you should have listened to this. But I did find the second watch far more enjoyable than the first, maybe because of that lack of frenetic fear, or maybe for other reasons. The movie seems to hate French people. Did you all of the French people, except maybe her lawyer, are pretty awful. The
It's
French
interesting.
legal system is hideous. Like
I love that French court is just whoever has the strongest feeling in that moment gets to speak.
it's there are no rules. There doesn't seem to be any presumption of innocence. It's just like people trying to outsmart one another, and like you can just scream at a kid, or like and they're all wearing these absurd robes with like dangling French paraphernalia, and like you can just right anybody in the courtroom can interrupt you. I didn't even understand what were those people doing behind. Like they weren't the jury, they were just people who were visiting, and it was like a multi-ethnic bunch of beautiful, just like interested view onlookers who are there for this spectacular show. The prosecutor is like such a prick. He's like scoffing at the blind 9-year old every time he says anything in such a preposterous way. It seems so silly if it weren't for the fact that it followed the death of this man who is the father of a blinded boy, which could potentially lead to the lifetime imprisonment of this famous novelist. Like there is a silliness to the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think that it hangs in the balance right in the center of the film, which is framed around this incredible argument that they have, which it just so happens, and I guess in the retelling this does sound sort of silly, but it definitely works in the movie. It just so happens that the husband has recorded a very vicious argument that they've had the day before he dies. And that gets played in its entirety in the courtroom. The son is sitting there, he hears the whole thing. And a lot of it is about parenting. And that's the heart of the film for me. And the most interesting thing about it, the way that that argument moves from, well, couldn't we just discuss scheduling through to, you are not a victim. What you are
It's
doing is,
it's
you're
great.
playing the martyr. You put things between yourself and your writing on purpose because you're afraid. You're so petrified by your own fucking standards. Like I've watched this so many times because I put it in my own show. I just think it's
Yeah, and I
worth it
want
just
to I
for
want
that.
to talk about the ideas behind that scene also, and like the extent to which you and I feel comparable
Yeah.
emotions to that. I think that the movie realized how I keep on going back and forth between film and movie, and now I'm self-conscious about it. Does it
It
is
doesn't
film,
matter.
are they synonyms and one is just like a more pretentious version of the other? Like a
In
film
uh
is
in
a
high
higher
school, in high school I had a film studies teacher who was like, now there's a film and then there's a movie. I think this is a
right.
film.
But that's okay, this is a film. It wants to be a film. I keep on thinking that the film is smart about its own absurdities because they even have the film has the main character say, now I'm thinking perhaps he forced that conversation upon us, that he made that argument happen because he was filming it within the
Mm,
movie, the
mm.
movie within the movie. So it's not it. I think it realized, Trier realized the extent to which that could strain credibility. So had a character voice the fact, like, well, maybe it was causal, not coincidental. Like maybe it was intentional, which would make it far more logical that he had this as evidence for the viewer to have access to in a way that Otherwise, it would have to be filtered through one of their memories, which wouldn't serve the same role as this objective document in the middle of what is, I think, defined by subjectivity more than anything else. I mean, if there's a thesis to this film, it's that you can't trust anybody's perspective on another person or event or pretty much anything at all.
Yeah, and she basically says that when she's commenting, when she's talking
Yeah.
to the psychologist in the courtroom, like if we just took your perspective, we could tell a certain story, but that's not the whole truth. But yeah, let's talk about the argument and what it is that they're arguing about. To me, to me it's an argument about it's something that I relate to very much. This tendency that I have when I'm afraid of failure to put some other person, place, or thing between me and the actual work. And that's what the mother accuses her husband of doing. Like, you've you've decided to homeschool our son, you've decided to start this renovation that's never ending, and now you're sitting here complaining that you don't have any time to write, but you decided to do all those things and you can change it. You have complete power to change all that, but you're not changing it because you're afraid. And I felt I so related to him in that scene.
And he denies it,
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yeah. Yep.
He, but does he have a compelling argument? Because I don't remember it if he does.
Well, he just keeps saying, I'm living on your schedule. You're the one that makes the rules. He and I just revolve around you, which is, something I also relate to when there's one person in the partnership who is, in this case, she's more famous, but say they make the money,
Yeah.
or for whatever reason they have more, I suppose, for lack of a better word, power, then it's difficult. It's difficult for him to say, all right, I'm gonna send our kid to school. I'm going to get other people to come and finish this renovation because he's not contributing any money. In a way, that's kind of like what the fight's really about, is who's
Right.
bringing in the cash.
Right. Combined with the ego side of it, that his wife is a well-renowned, well-known author, and he can't get his first book published.
Mm.
And that seems equally important to both of them. It seems like earlier in their marriage, she wanted him to publish as much as he wanted him to publish, if only to live with somebody who felt better about himself. And then when he can't, or when he stops, she steals or takes or pillages or plunders or borrows or is given, one of the main plot devices of his book. And then she turns that into a very successful work of her own. I empathized with that intense feeling, which again, I'm very fortunate to be on the other side of now, but that I lived with for a decade or so, of knowing that other people knew that what mattered to me most was publishing a novel, and I hadn't yet been able to publish a novel. And I do remember the shame of that time in my life, even though I also understood that nobody really cared whether I published a novel or not. It was just that they wanted me to publish a novel so I would get over the fact that I hadn't ever yet published a novel.
Mm.
And I felt that was implied in a pretty sophisticated way, that like they were a unit and she was rooting for him, but Jesus Christ, man, like you got to fucking do it. Like she was almost fed up with his self-pity.
Yeah, yeah. And there's this point. I mean, the whole time her tone is very dismissive of his concerns. Like, you can change things if you want to. It's totally within your power to change these things. And then at a certain point, she just completely loses it and tears him a new one. But one of the things that he comes back with is, or maybe this starts her off on her tirade. He says, I can't stand any more of your fucking ice. Like
Yeah.
she's just so, she's kind of one. Like she is a famous, successful writer. I get the sense that she's one of those writers that basically whatever she writes, it'll get published
Right.
and everybody will read it. So
Yes.
she's in that golden zone.
Yeah. I mean, she seems like a, I don't know French literature now anymore, but she seems like a sort of a Rachel Cusk type figure, like an
Yes.
auto fiction based on her own life. Whatever her next novel is, people are lining up to get excited to read it. Hard to separate who she is versus her writing.
Yeah.
Um, and everybody around her is being used for her writing as well.
Yeah, like early in the movie, somebody says, "Oh, she's a writer who." I mean, that's the other thing we haven't mentioned is the whole film starts with an interview. A PhD student has come to interview her, and the big question is, you're always mixing truth and fiction. How much of what is in your books is true? So, yeah, that's all there in the background. But to me, it's this question of, is it like it's just that classic negotiation that
Yeah.
exists within every couple of like, yes, I could, like from his perspective, it's like the argument is, yes, I could stop the renovation, I could stop homeschooling our son. But what you're not acknowledging, or she's not acknowledging, is that that is difficult. It's not just a snap your fingers thing. And she's also not acknowledging any of his fear. And so he just gets angrier and angrier.
And to combine your two takeaways, him having less power in the relationship and him putting these obstacles in the way of his own writing are in some ways one of the same because it is not only, terrifying, but like strategically probably a bad decision to erase everything from your list of priorities except for a book that might or might not be published. Like it, as long as he's doing a renovation and homeschooling his kid, his life can't be an entire failure. Like it also won't be a success, but that's the feeling that I understand. Like part of the reason why I teach a few days a week is because I like to be a part of a community and I like to, be forced to interact with people, et cetera. But also when I get to the point in my career where I'll no longer be able to publish novels, that can't just be it. Like and a different version of myself would think somebody maybe with more self-confidence or I don't know, a better sales record would say like, but why would there be a point where you didn't need to, where you couldn't write novels anymore, or where you stopped selling them? Like, why don't you just work harder to not like make the novels better and more people will read them? And I just like don't think that's the way the world works. I think so much of our business is based on luck and zeitgeist and fortune and winning the lottery or whatever that like the idea of clearing my desk of everything except for the novel means that just too much is riding on the novel. Like already too much is riding on the novel, like so much of my sense of self. So the idea of saying like I'm going to stop teaching or I'm going to stop being the primary parent to my kids so I can do this, not like I don't need more writing on the novel. And
Mm.
that's where the balance of power in the movie was really interesting to me because she can afford to say like I write all the time, it's the only thing that matters to me,
I can write it in
because
any
she is a
circumstances.
massive success, right? Like she
Mm-hmm.
she can take everything away from other than writing because she knows that writing will be ego sustaining, and financially sustaining and all these other things. But if you're in any more of a precarious situation, which is 99.99999% of writers out there, it's yes, you can do that, but it's probably the wrong emotional psychological decision. That
Mm.
like it's for me at least, it's not a question of putting barriers to my writing the way that you said it might be for you. Because I don't know when you say that, is it more like you feel like you want to go shopping and clean the bathroom before you sit down and write, or is it that you want to like have a podcast in addition to your poetry? Because those are two very different things. I understand both of them and I feel both of them, but I will argue on behalf of you having a podcast and me having my teaching career, even if it distracts from the writing. There's no real argument on behalf of like my sending a whole bunch of bullshit emails before I start writing fiction because I just like don't have the balls yet to like sit down and actually start writing because that's scary. And I don't want to be need to focus in that way yet. Well, this sort of silly work will, make me feel quick pheromone. I mean, yeah, hit of joy. But which one were you talking about? Were you talking about cluttering your life with other things that theoretically matter, or were you talking about just like delaying sitting down and getting to the desk?
Well, I was talking about cluttering my life, but actually both of those things are very, very active. I think my life is a lot less cluttered than it was 5 years ago, and I'm grateful for that. But I will still, clean the kitchen, put on a load of laundry, make the bed, do the vacuuming. And it's like, okay, I guess I can't procrastinate anymore. I have to actually sit down in front of a screen, and I really envy people who can just sit down and do it. I feel like that is, if there are two types of writers in the world to me, it's like those who can just sit down and do it, and those like me who will almost do anything not to.
Yeah, I think I was more like you until I had the severe health crisis, neurological disorder, where I only have 3.5-ish, 4 hours of clarity a day. So those days where I do the other things first means that I don't get to the writing, and then I really feel like shit. Like the fact that I know that I'm only good for a very small number of hours, but I can do laundry and respond to bullshit emails when my left eye is the vision's occluded and the room feels like it's tilting and I can't really think of language. Like that means I need to force myself to prioritize the day in a way that I didn't used to. And I think even though I used to have 12 good hours and now I have 3.5 good hours, I didn't actually ever write for more than 3 hours a day. I didn't have the stamina for that anyway. So now I think that has taught me to push those 3 hours earlier and to prioritize them, because if not, I lose them entirely. I can't even lie to myself and say, I'm just going to do this one load of laundry, and then get to work.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the thing about you, Brian, is like I still find this really amazing that you have this incredible pragmatism. Like there's a version of that where you just go, look, I have a disability. I can't write, in the way that like whether that's like fully true or not, in the way that the husband in this film goes, well, I've got a homeschool, I've got a renovation, I can't write. Like so many of us, mere
Yeah.
mortals, so many of us will do that with anything. And you have such a big reason to hide from your writing and you don't.
I appreciate you saying that, but I don't think it is a reason. I don't think it's self-control. I think it's a different sickness. I think that if I don't write, I don't feel productive and I feel like shit. I feel depressed isn't the right word, but I feel bad. I don't, it makes me feel bad if I'm not productive. And that's an illness. Like that's not good. I mean, it is something our society values at the moment for better or ill, but like it's not a characteristic of mine that I'm proud of. It's just like something that I know about myself, that I better to fight through it and to schedule a life and to have every minute of every day planned, and including the minutes I need to recover so I don't wake up tomorrow blind, than to have gone through 4 days where I didn't do anything. And then I don't know, I hate it. I hate myself. I hate the feeling. I hate all of it. So
So you know
it's,
what that
it's,
feels like,
it's
basically.
just a disposition. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I part of it was like, I was bedridden for 2 years. Like the only thing I did was see doctors and feel bad, sorry for myself.
Mm.
And I hated that so much. Like it was so awful that now that I do have 3-4 hours a day, I, on weekends, all of that time is dedicated to family. On Mondays and Wednesdays, I teach, so I can't write. Every evening, I need to get my boys to to bed, which requires a couple hours of some degree of mental clarity. So if I don't write in the 9 hours a week that I've allotted to myself, I feel like I've wasted the whole week. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, I don't think that's a strength of personality so much as this like real, I don't know. I keep on using the phrase sickness. I don't know a better term, but it's like this like terrible thing that happens to people when they are 14 or 19 or 23, where we decide that what matters is poetry or writing fiction or and and I really don't think I think that's bad. I don't think it's good. I think it's similar to like I have a student now who's like a very, very, very good ice hockey player, but like not good enough to be an ice hockey player. And like you can see it where he leaves school early most days and he's like going to go to a high school where they prioritize ice hockey and his father is like really into his ice hockey playing and you just like quit now. Like quit now. Like what is
Yeah.
the end? What is the goal for all this? And I remember in that decade plus of failing to publish novels, there was like if I had quit then, the reason I didn't quit is because I knew that if I gave up, then I wouldn't have been able to be happy. I would have always had this thing that I didn't do but it's pretend. It's all art of it's all random. It's like I randomly decided there was this thing. And that's something that I think teachers, we accidentally inculcate that in our students. I think most parents will say, like, I don't care what my kid's passion is. I just want them to have a passion.
Mm.
And I do think that's good. And I think that there's some utility to that. But I also think it's really dangerous. And like, I so desperately wouldn't want my kid to think that he should be like an actor or like a dancer or a clarinet player or a writer. Like it seems like this is this weird thing that we fetishize in ourselves and in our kids and in our students it, but like how many happy professional musicians or dancers or actors do you know?
None. Don't
Almost
know.
none,
Don't know
right?
any.
And then
And
how
I
many
don't.
people do you
I,
know who are like vaguely grumpy because they thought that that's what they wanted to do and now they're not doing that anymore or they are doing it and
so
like
many.
their spouse doesn't like it. It's so many. So it's this it's this deeply confusing, I can talk about it in terms of myself and it's a little bit bullshitty because like I have succeeded, so like nobody like it doesn't really make sense that I'm complaining about that for myself. I mean, I'm not succeeded like I'm a household name, but like I set like a arbitrary goal of publishing a novel with a major press and then like published a few novels with a major press and like that makes me happy enough and it's fine. But like through my own kids and through my students, all of like the telos of all of this is like we want to create kids who care about something and achieve it and work hard to do it and I do we really want that? I don't know. I don't coming from the adult side, I don't know if that's really the right way to make humans.
Yeah, it's like handing on a curse unless you also hand on some sort of pragmatism, realism, understanding that making it is not going to necessarily make you happy, that happiness comes from a different place. But I don't know that we really bother to make that distinction. I think,
Well, that folding into the other part of the conversation that we're having is the importance of children in my life,
right.
of my kids,
Mm,
because it was the only other way I could think of manufacturing meaning.
yeah. Yeah. So, we're going to get much deeper into this conversation on The Secret Show. If you go to sleerickets.substack.com, you can sign up and get a week's access to the show for free. It's really cheap, much cheaper than any other Substack you're going to find, honestly. And it's full of gossip and silliness and some really deep chats as well. This particular deep yet silly chat that I'm about to have with Brian is about a truly insane article that I found on Slate. I don't think of myself as a hate reader. I don't think that hate reading is the best thing to do, but I think Slate has become that for me, which is honestly kind of sad given that 15 years ago the Slate Culture Gabfest was an absolute essential for me. But, things have changed. So we're discussing this article, which is titled, "I'm starting to think you guys don't really want a village." It's by a writer called Claire Haber-Harris, who has her own Substack. And the basis for the article, the impetus for her writing the article, is that she's finding it really difficult to create the kind of community that she needs to support parenting. But it's also, and she acknowledges this, the article is also about the possibility that the problem is that nobody really wants to hang out with her. So it's a funny premise to begin with, and Brian makes it even funnier. But we also get quite intimate and honest in a way that I think is sort of only possible on podcasts. And I'm so glad that we did. One of the reasons for that is that Brian and Matthew and I had a conversation about writing and parenting back in April. That episode was called Owls in the Desert. And I went into it thinking that I had so much to ask and so much to say. And it was my job to ask the questions. But about halfway through, I completely lost my nerve. And I thought, you know what? I don't have any business asking these questions. These questions are sort of dumb. The conversation still turned out really well, thanks to those guys. But yeah, I lost my nerve. And the reasons why I lost my nerve, Brian and I get into in the second half of this chat, along with some of the really difficult but really important truths about the gap between people who have children and people who don't have children. So head over to the Substack, check it out. There are 125 odd other episodes there as well. And lastly, don't forget, send in your AMA questions for Matthew, Brian, Cameron, and me. We want to be grilled lightly. Just lightly. Okay, thank you all for listening. You can send those questions to us, care of Matthew at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. And with any luck, we will all be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.